The desert wind was dry that morning, sharp and unforgiving, scraping against the tents pitched in the hills of Moriah. Abraham sat in silence, eyes fixed on the horizon, the sun barely peeking over the mountains. Beside him, his son Isaac, young and full of questions, busied himself with preparing their supplies. But the father's heart was not at peace. For 3 days they had walked in silence, 3 days of echoes in the soul, haunted by the voice that had pierced through the silence of the night. Take your son, your only son whom you love, Isaac, and go to the region of Moriah. Sacrifice him there as a burnt offering. To understand the weight of this moment, we must go back. Abraham, once Abram, had waited a lifetime for this child. Isaac wasn't just a son, he was the embodiment of a promise, the miracle that laughed in the face of impossibility. God had said, through Isaac, the nations would be blessed, that he would be the father of many. And now, this? What kind of God asks for the very promise he gave? This is the trial that shakes the ground beneath the feet of every believer. When the God who gives also asks to take. When faith is not about blessing, but about surrender. This is not a story of God's cruelty. It's a story of trust on the edge of reason. Abraham did not argue, not like before when he pleaded for Sodom, not like when he questioned the Lord's justice. This time he simply obeyed. There is something sacred in silent obedience when faith does not come with fireworks but with footsteps. Up the mountain they walked, Abraham, Isaac, and the firewood of surrender. Father, Isaac asked, the fire and wood are here, but where is the lamb? And Abraham replied words that still echo today, God will provide. These 3 words carry the tension of a soul torn between obedience and love, between command and covenant. It is not merely a hopeful guess, it is a declaration born out of trust in a God who had never failed him yet. As they reached the mountain's top, Abraham built the altar with trembling hands. Each stone laid was a step deeper into the unknown. Then he bound Isaac, his beloved, and placed him upon the wood. Let us pause here. This moment is often read too quickly, but it is here, right here, that heaven must have held its breath. This wasn't a man void of emotion. Abraham loved Isaac. This was the son who made Sarah laugh, the boy whose name meant joy, and now he lay bound before the knife. If you're moved by stories like these, stories that reveal the heartbeat of faith and the trials that shape the soul, consider taking a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe. These stories matter, and through them we find pieces of our own journey with God. The blade rose, but before it fell, a voice clearer than thunder, gentler than wind, called out, Abraham, Abraham, do not lay a hand on the boy. And there, caught in the thicket, a ram. Provision, substitution, a shadow of things to come. The trial had never been about death. It had always been about trust. God's command was not the end point, it was the furnace. And Abraham came out refined. Faith that obeys even when it doesn't understand is faith that transforms. Centuries later, on another hill not far from Moriah, another father would lay his son on wood. This time, the knife would not be withheld. There would be no ram in the thicket, because that time, the son was the lamb. In Abraham's story, we see not just obedience, we see foreshadowing, we see the rehearsal of redemption. Abraham named that place, the Lord will provide. Not the Lord has provided. Because this moment wasn't just for him, it was prophecy wrapped in history, a picture of a future cross. So what do we do when God calls us to lay down what we love most? When the promise and the sacrifice seem to clash, we remember Moriah. We remember the walk of faith, and we remember that God's provision meets us not in the comfort of clarity, but in the cost of surrender. Faith is never forged in ease. It is shaped in the moments when everything in us wants to turn back, when the command feels unreasonable and obedience looks like loss. But it's there, in the silence, in the wrestling, in the climb, that God does his deepest work. Abraham descended the mountain, but he was not the same man who climbed it. The altar had altered him. The fire had refined him. The voice of God had confirmed not just his calling, but his character. This is the God who doesn't just test our faith. He strengthens it through the testing. He doesn't just give us promises. He walks us through the pain that proves them. And every step of Abraham's obedience became a testimony, not just for his own life, but for generations to come. We live in a world that wants instant answers, immediate blessings, and painless obedience. But the mountain teaches us that there's a cost to covenant, that love without sacrifice is sentiment, not strength. Isaac too walked down that mountain changed. Though the scripture is quiet about his thoughts, how could he ever forget that moment? The binding, the firewood, the voice that saved him. It was a living memory burned into his soul. And later in life, when he himself faced famine, faced conflict, faced fear, perhaps he remembered the mountain, remembered that when all seemed lost, God was still Jehovah Jireh, the Lord who provides. If today you are carrying a burden you cannot explain, if God feels silent or distant, if you feel like you're walking up your own Moriah, don't let go of trust. Obedience is rarely easy, but it is never wasted. The beauty of Abraham's story is not in how it ends, it's in what it reveals. That God never desired Isaac's death, he desired Abraham's heart. The altar was not for the son, it was for the father's surrender. And God, in his mercy, made it clear that the provision would always match the obedience. In your own life, you may be asked to surrender something sacred, a dream, a plan, a relationship, and it will feel like the death of something beautiful. But hold on, because the same God who called Abraham to the mountain also met him there. Not all trials are punishments. Some are invitations into deeper trust, into refined character, into a faith that can stand the weight of blessing. The trial of Abraham's faith was not the end of his story, it was the pivot point, the moment when obedience and promise collided. And out of that moment came a legacy so vast that we still speak of it today. You and I, in our own trials, are part of that legacy. Every act of obedience, every choice to trust, every surrender in silence, it weaves into the tapestry of God's greater story. So don't be afraid of the mountain. Don't resist the altar. The fire will not consume you. It will clarify you. The voice of God still speaks. And when you follow, even when it costs everything, you'll find that he has already gone ahead of you. And waiting in the thicket, just beyond your sight, is the provision you never imagined. For our God is faithful, yesterday, today, and forever. This is the story of a man, a son, a trial, and a God who never fails to provide. This is the trial of Abraham's faith, and it is also in many ways the trial of ours. In the quiet after the mountain, Abraham worshipped, not just with words, but with a life fully yielded. He had walked with God through the unthinkable and emerged with a deeper knowing, not of how God works, but of who God is. We often seek answers, explanations, logic, but faith doesn't grow in explanations. It grows in experience, and the experience of Abraham teaches us that trust is not proven by what we receive, but by what we are willing to release. Many centuries later, the Apostle James would write, "Was not our father Abraham considered righteous for what he did when he offered his son Isaac on the altar. His faith and actions were working together, and through this, scripture says he was called God's friend. What a legacy! Not just father of nations, but friend of God. This friendship wasn't built on comfort, it was built on covenant, on obedience and uncertainty, on worship that cost something, on love that went up the mountain and laid down what it could not bear to lose. And God honoured it, not just with words, but with a promise renewed. Because you have not withheld your son, your only son, I will bless you. And through your offspring, all nations on earth will be blessed. That blessing became the doorway through which the Messiah would enter the world. Abraham's obedience echoed across generations down into the very bloodline of Christ. One man's surrender opened the floodgates of grace for all humanity. So when your faith is tested, remember this: you're not walking alone. You're walking in the footsteps of Abraham. You are part of a legacy of those who believed even when they didn't see, who trusted even when it hurt, who obeyed even when it meant the altar. Faith is not the absence of fear, it is the choice to believe God anyway, to say, I will go, even when you do not know what awaits. That's the faith God honours, the faith that moves mountains, that births nations, that blesses the world. The trial of Abraham's faith wasn't about breaking him, it was about revealing him. And in your own trials, something is being revealed too. A deeper strength, a stronger trust, a faith forged by fire and refined by surrender. And above it all, a father watching, waiting, ready to speak your name, ready to provide. The trial will not last forever, but the legacy of trust you build in it will echo for eternity.